evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the long pre-season is almost over. The D's kicked off the season on a high, recording a 59-point victory over the Saints on a scorcher of an afternoon out of Moorabbin. We have one more practice hit out before the real stuff begins, and I, for one, are chomping at the bit to make amends for the way we were bundled out in straight sets last season. Joining me tonight for a podcast simulation to talk about the match simulation against St Kilda is Demonland's resident tactician, Binman. Good evening, Binman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Demonlanders. And simulation. I went there live. It was the first time I've been there for many a year. I think the last time I was 12 or 13, went by myself, and Lockett kicked a dozen, I think, or maybe that's it completely in my imagination. He kicked a big bag and we got thrashed, and I stood in the animal cage, which is where I actually stood again at the ground. But I watched the replay and they must have said the word simulation in the 8 or ended up being 7 periods. Must have been contractually obliged by the AFL to say the word simulation X amount of times, because they said it 100 times if they said it at all.
When did it become a match simulation? I know that we often talk about it at training. The track watchers often pull out the match sim, and that is a match sim because it's not, with an opposition, and we're trying to simulate match conditions without having an opposition. So it's very hard to do it. So training's a bit like dancing with your sister. But now, this year in particular, everyone's cottoned on to this match simulation. And the next lot of games are just practice match. They're actually called practice matches. These ones were called match sims.
Well, I suspect it's all about, I could just imagine the boffins in the marketing department of the AFL with their magic round or whatever it's called. I have no idea what that round's called. And there's
gather round.
Gather round. There's no pre-season matches, so they probably sent out a missive to KO and, don't under any circumstances call it a practice match. To simulation, we don't want to take the gloss off our gather round or some such.
They don't want to take the gloss over the practice matches next week.
From this point on, I'm going to call it a practice match. Though, having said that, it was like a simulation in the 7th period of the game, which we'll touch on a bit later. That 7th period, you left before.
Yeah, I had to leave. I had a dinner to get to, and I didn't realise.
I watched it to the very end, and in that 7th period, I couldn't work out what was going on. I was saying, why are they throwing it in? The umpires left after the 6th period. They pulled the pin, and you made a point on that thread, the match day thread, which was a well-made point. Of course, if you weren't there, it was hard to tell. And the commentators didn't make much of this, but it was flipping hot.
It was.
It was humid. Like, it wasn't mega humid, but that added to it. And where I was standing was pretty much not close, almost dead wing, but between the two interchange benches, between the Saints and our interchange bench. But for some reason or other, the D's players actually ran on and off the ground directly in front of me, and then the Saints to the left of their dugout. And the players coming off, even right from the very beginning of the game, they were cooked. Sweat was pouring off them. And some of those younger players too, it cooled down a bit by then. The other thing that they commentators didn't note, except once or twice when the gum trees were bending over backwards and they finally noted it, it may not have been as evident at home either how windy it was. And so it wasn't just sort of windy, it was gusty, but it was diagonally windy. So, that's a pretty good setup there, I have to say. They got the grandstand. If the wind had been coming from the southeast as opposed to the northeast, the grandstand would have done a good job of blocking it, but it was coming the opposite direction through the non-existent stand on the other side of the ground directly to that pocket beneath where you were sitting, Andy, in the stand. And so it was a tricky wind to kick with, I thought.
Well, straight away we do have a caller, so let's see what our caller has to say. Welcome to the Demonland podcast. Who are we speaking to?
Michael from Paran. Hello, gentlemen. Just a quick question, if I may, to be answered later on or in due course. James Jordan. Some people are rapt for him, think he's a great player. What's his future look like this year with Hunter's arrival? And what's your opinion of him as a player? I think he's very good, but he does have his detractors, which puzzles me a bit. Be interesting to know your thoughts.
B-Man, you want to take that now? We were going to talk about him later, but you can quickly talk about it.
He is a bit of a divisive player. My own view on him is I think he's a terrific player. He's got good footy smarts. There was a bit of a knock on him last year for moving the ball slowly and taking time to release the ball. And we'll probably touch on that in a bit when we talk about the tactics and stuff. But, I think there's very much that's an instruction that he's under in terms of making sure there's good options. He's a bit of I think I was noted this on Demonland. He strikes me as maybe one of those players that takes 4 or 5 seasons to build a AFL elite athletic physique. And because he's got the footy smarts, he makes good decisions. The challenge for him a little bit is that he's not got a position that he's called him his own. I mean,
that's the problem.
His strength in some ways in the team is that he's so flexible and can be playing multiple positions. He's obviously really disciplined, so the coach loves that aspect about him. He can go to the halfback flank. He can go into the middle as he did in the 3 periods. He spent most of his time in the middle in that second. But the downside of that is that he hasn't got a position he calls his own. So my own view is that this game was as close to a dress rehearsal for round 1 as you'll get, mirroring what we did in 21 and 22. The first of the practice games was the real serious hit out, and the second one was, with some of the younger players and trying different positional stuff. So it was a bit of a concern for him that he was in the second team, not the first team, because I honestly, we'll talk about this no doubt, Andy, but I don't think there'll be massive changes, 1 or 2 max from that 22 or that lined up in the first 4 periods of that game. But he makes a perfect 23rd player, so there's every chance he'll be, unfortunately for him, that 23rd player. But he might get used more often if that's the role that he does play than previously, because of the change to not having to come off, not waiting till someone's injured before you can bring that 23rd player in. I really rate him. I think he's a long-term player for the club, but yeah, as I said, he might be a player. In my mind, Glenn Lovett. I might be imagining that, but my memory is that Glenn Lovett took a while to get to the level that he finally did, and I'm hoping and thinking that Jordan might be one of those sort of players. Gary Ablett being another one. Gary Ablett Jr. being famously a player that took a while to get to the level that he ended up at.
Well, let's hope he can be half as good as Gary Ablett Jr.
He's going to get to Gary Ablett Jr.'s level, but part of Gary Ablett Jr. was more about his discipline and work rate and stuff, and I don't think that's an issue for JJ. So, but having said all of that, he will be disappointed, as will Hibbo, that he was in that second team, not the first team.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll get into all of that a bit later on. Thank you, Michael. Anything else?
Good. Thank you very much.
All right.
No, that's fine. Looking forward to the coverage of the game.
No problem. Thanks, mate.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Bye.
Thanks, Michael.
All right. Unfortunately, our other esteemed co-host, George, cannot join us tonight because he's on holidays, and it's actually the most Melbourne supporter activity possible. George is skiing at the moment, and at least it's not during the season, so technically he's not perpetuating the stereotype. I think tonight will be quite informal. We'll be doing a proper season 2023 preview in a few weeks' time once George returns. And in a moment, as B-Man mentioned, he'll give his thoughts on our setup and tactics and whether he thinks we've made changes to the way that we played from 2022. We'll also go through the playing list, give some observations from the match, as well as some of my observations of those players from preseason training sessions that I've attended over the summer. I'll give a little bit of a match wrap up. The Demons, we ventured out to Moorabbin. As we mentioned, it was a sweltering day. Temperatures were in the lower 30s. I was fortunately seated in the stands and in the shade, and even I was melting. So I can only imagine, as B-Man mentioned, what the players were experiencing baking in the hot afternoon sun. And it's also important to note that there was a significant breeze There was no break from the heat with that breeze. It was favouring the southern end, which was to our advantage in the second and fourth periods. The game was initially billed as 6 20-minute periods, and when I arrived at the ground, I heard the announcement that there were to be 8 25-minute periods with no time on, and I was a bit baffled by this, but then I thought, well, they're going to play a seniors and then a reserves. But as you mentioned, B-Man, the reserves match was abandoned after 3 periods. The umpires pulled up stumps 2 periods into the second match. I wasn't able to stick around for the Casey portion, and B-Man will give his observations a bit later on some of those guys. And as you would expect, the D's dominated play for most of the game. Our biggest strength is our midfield, and we certainly flexed that muscle. Oliver Pedraca-Viney asserted control over the midfield with 26, 22 and 19 possessions respectively, with Track slotting through 3 majors as he spent some time resting in the forward line. And our centre line has been bolstered by the inclusion of ex-Bulldog Lockie Hunter, who our own esteemed Whispering Jack waxed poetically that Hunter looks like being the yin on the wing to the yang of Langdon. And Hunter's racked up 27 possessions. He's kicked a goal, and we'll talk more in depth about him shortly. But spoiler alert, I think he might be the steal of the trade period. Langdon, for his part, was at his gut-running best. He racked up 15 possessions of his own, including a goal. And the D's unfurled their new irresistible ruck partnership pairing, Collingwood's 2-time All-Australian Brodie Grundy with our own 6-time All-Australian Max Gawn. And whilst I still think we have to work out the mechanics of what the best way to utilise the pair will be, Gawn had 16 possessions and 7 marks with 15 hitouts and 2 goals, whilst Grundy had only 8 posies and 2 marks, but importantly had 20 hitouts and kicked a goal. And I think you'd have to be very happy if they could perform that way most weeks, 35 plus hitouts and 3 goals between them. I reckon I'd take that almost any week of the year. Up forward, Tom McDonald is back after his injury woes last season. Ben Brown looks fit, and despite being on a restricted program at trainings, he seems to bob up for a bag of goals in the intra-club match sims, and he's kicked 2 against the Saints. And this is in a forward line that was missing the injured Fritsch, who, as you know, has been our leading goal kicker for the last 2 years, and also T-Mac having to go down back after half-time when Lever came off with a suspected ankle injury. And despite all this, I think it's very important to note that we still managed to kick over 100 points for the match. A couple of quick standouts for me before B-Man gets into the nitty-gritty of our tactics and setups. The young defender Judd McVie from WA got the nod ahead of Premiership veteran Michael Hibberd, and Judd appears to have moved forwards in leaps and bounds in the off-season and will certainly make a claim for a place in the Demons' strong back line this year. I like the move of Rivers as a pinch hitter in the midfield. He adds another layer of depth in an already strong midfield. Cozzy Pickett too has also been given more midfield minutes, and he was his usual hard-to-pin-down self in this role. He produced some blistering runs and scored a couple of classy goals. As we know, the D's took the honours on the day to the tune of 59 points, and I think the scoreboard accurately reflected our dominance. Now into the tactics and setups. I've attended a number of our pre-season training sessions at Gosh's paddock this summer. Admittedly, I don't purport to be an expert in any way, in the way that the team sets up and the tactics that we use. And B-Man, you're more analytical in this regard. But one of the things I did observe at training this pre-season was a real concerted effort to look inboard and find the loose man and not always only go down the line and along the wings. Out of Moorabbin on Friday, I was heartened to see us look inboards a number of occasions and hit someone up in the middle of the ground or at centre forward or sort of in the front and centre rather than along the boundary. And I get that we'll mix up these tactics a bit, but at times I thought we did revert to type, perhaps under pressure, and often still went along the boundary. And as I said, I think we'll mix that up to not be too predictable to oppositions. And B-Man, you're at the game. What did you observe in terms of our setup and tactics, and is it any different to our setup from last year?
In terms of the setup, structurally, how they lined up, it's tricky at the ground. Like in that position, I was down on ground level on the wing, so it's quite hard to see. And so I watched the replay as well. But just before I go into that, it's been interesting. There's been some fantastic stuff on Demonland this year around the training, yourself included, but a whole bunch of regular posters have just been putting some phenomenal stuff on Demonland. And
yeah, well, I'll just actually call them out by name. We've had Kev Martin down there, D Spencer, Gator, Slarty Fastbast. I've been down there occasionally, Gator. And anyone else I've missed out, I apologise. But you've all been great. It's been fantastic to get people out there. A lot of us are desk-bound and can't get out. Oh, Picket Fence as well, getting out to Casey, of all places where we can't really get to. because
and there was some terrific info for, I forget, where was the community camp / training sessions?
I can't even. Yay. I think.
Yeah, there was some really interesting stuff on Demonland in the back of that. I think
Dazzle Davey was out there.
Yeah, Dazzle Davey, and there was another poster whose name escapes me, Frapp, or who talked about hearing the coaches talk. He was involved in maybe a coterie event prior to that, or which was really interesting. One of which was the comment that that I found really fascinating was a dialogue. I'm not sure if there were statements made about, did we come back a bit sort of worn out psychologically from the 21? And I was reflecting on it. I mean, I thought that wasn't an issue for us last year. The indications are from a few players, Harms coming out as well, saying that, in a quote,
he wasn't in good shape.
He wasn't in great shape. And, it was an issue, defining issue. I don't think so, but certainly another issue. I was saying last year was all about the, one more grain of sand on the, on the scales to tip it towards being an unsuccessful year. There were so many things like this time last year. It was all of that Bartlett rubbish in the Herald Sun. There was the talk about Sorrento. It was, all around this time, and we hadn't even kicked the Sharon in anger when all of that, and then after that it just kept rolling. There was one thing after another, and injuries and, all of those things. So that was really interesting. And just from a personal perspective, I was thinking that I was exhausted from footy after the end of last year. It really felt like there was no break with the, it was fantastic what the club did, but, having the MCG event in December at the end of 21, and, it really felt like a continuous thing of footy rolling into that season. So I consciously didn't watch the replays. I tried to watch the Collingwood-Melbourne game from the late season game, and I only could get halfway through the second quarter, knowing, of course, how it ended up. So, I've been really refreshed, but a big part of that has been the quality of the reporting and the posts about training. So as it relates to, how we set up, there was also partly Richard was not Richardson. So what am I saying? There was talk in the media a little bit about us being a bit more aggressive with our ball movement, and that that's certainly been a theme of a lot of the track reports, including from yourself, Andy. And I think that for me, it sort of speaks to more of an approach. What I would say about our game plan, and it would borne out. I was really interested to watch it, but in going into that game, that's what I figured, is that there won't be major wholesale changes to our game plan. You just, anyone who expects that to happen will be very disappointed. Not that many people would, I guess. There'll be tweaks to the game plan. Now, a lot of people are really keen for Melbourne to be more aggressive, we certainly will be. But I think that that seems to be the theme. One of the things that you reported on, one of the training drills that from a week or so ago, was a drill where there was a contest, 4 players hit the contest, and as one, all 4 players run down the ground and push up. That is a Melbourne way of playing. And during the commentary call, the commentator, who they were also in practice mode, it felt like to me. So they were a simulation. They weren't a very good simulation of callers. But the fella made the point at one point when I think it was Chandler ended up getting free in the forward line at the southern end, where Melbourne's model essentially is out we outnumbered them in defence at the beginning of that scoring chain. We had more players at the fall of the ball at the beginning of that scoring chain, and somehow managed, as the ball transitioned down the ground, to outnumber them in the forward line. And that was the point he was making. And that drill that you were talking about is exactly that drill. And that outnumbering at each contest is such a key to the way Melbourne play. But the fundamental thing that's required for that is super, super, super fit players. And my major takeaway from that game, like the main thing, and I kept on probably talking about it ad nauseum to my friends I was watching it with, is how incredibly fit the players look. And not just fit. They look, like I was talking about this last year, they look like 800-metre runners without a skerrick of fat on them, and super fit. So, they look in great condition. You mentioned Rivers. In the game what we saw last year at this corresponding game, the North Melbourne game down at Casey, Rivers looked much heavier, was strapping on his thigh or his calf, which he ended up having for 6 or 7 weeks. He looks in much, much better shape. They all, even Lever, who's been in the system for, 8 years now, probably, he looks super lean. They all look super lean. Grundy looks like a tall 800-metre runner. Gawn looks like a cyclist. It's incredible. So that ability to get numbers to the ball, and then as the scoring chain goes back the other way, to get outnumber the opposition again, just requires a huge amount of running, as does pressuring up on as the ball's coming at them. So, I think that's a big part of our aggression. Personally, it's a bit overplayed, the sort of notion that we were so stodgy last year, because the last 5 games we were very, very attacking in the last, in the first half of the last 5 games. As we talked about last year, my theory on that was because we didn't have fuel in the tank and they knew it. And I think that was borne out, to be honest. After we've heard lots of stories, up to 10, 11 players carrying significant sort of niggles, injury into the final series, that all would have impacted their training and ability to maintain their fitness or even establish their fitness levels. So I think that the aggression will come from that fitness, but the point you made about going to the corridor, I think that's the critical change in the game plan. Now, that's not a radical change in the game plan either. It's a tweak. We talked again last year a lot about the philosophy of Goody is he's all about probability and percentages. Another way of being aggressive, I watched the Collingwood-Carlton game, and that was a pretty low-pressure game. I only watched the first half. It was 50 points each, somewhere around that at halftime. That was an open-flowing game, moving it really quick, partly because that's how Collingwood generate it through lots of handballs and running. That's a form of aggression that, lots of Melbourne fans would love to see because it's exciting to watch. That's not the way that we're going to be playing. Our more aggressive, I think, is going to be exactly what you just mentioned before, Andy, is the kicks to the corridor. And why I mentioned percentages is because I suspect Goody says to quite a number of players in our team, you just don't take that kick on because the percentages are low of you hitting it. But we've added Hunter, McVeigh. We've got Cozzy, who's probably averaging, close to 10 possessions a week. How many did you say you got this week?
Sorry, who's?
Cozzy.
How many possessions?
Yeah, 20, 19, something.
Yeah, something like that.
So if he can get north of 15 possessions, Salem comes back into that team, let's say, and McVeigh keeps his spot. Then you've also got Bowie, who's an excellent kick. That gives us 5 elite kicks in the team that all will have the green light from Goody to take that risky kick to the corridor on because they will hit the target 70% of the time. So, you've got Salem, McVeigh, Bowie, Hunter, and who am I missing here? I've got the 5th player. Salem, Bowie, Hunter, Cos getting his positions, and they can create those scoring chains that are really dangerous. And what the upshot of that is, our scoring will increase because, one, they'll hit more inside 50 targets, just like that kick that Hunter did to inside of the corridor to a leading Brown. Having said that, Lyon will be furious they left that leading line so open. But you kick to the corridor in the centre square corridor, your chances of scoring from that point on, if you hit that target, that's the best place to enter 50 from the ground. We struggled to hit that corridor target, and we didn't really go for it last year because we had so few players. And I've been banging on about this for years, on Demon Land and then not on the podcast, is our biggest weakness is our kicking skills. And, I'm wrapped the way Taylor's gone about it, but he's had a clear emphasis in the last 2-3 seasons of bringing in players with elite level kicking skills. If you've got 5 players, including Salem, when he comes back, assuming McVeigh keeps his spot, 5 out of your starting 22 in the elite category of kicking is a massive, massive, massive improvement for the Ds. And it means we can be more aggressive, predominantly exactly what you're saying, Andy, that corridor kick. We will take it on more. If we hit that corridor target, let's say 4 or 5 times on average more a match, that's going to translate to higher scoring teams. But the critical thing that's often lost is the scoring chains, is that it's not just about the goals that you kick from neat kicks inside 50 or you hit a target in a leading lane because you've got someone like Hunter who could do it. You've also not having scoring chains break down because you're missing those 20, 30-metre kicks. They look innocuous, but they're so critical that, that's why Bowie is so effective, because he I think he's just about the most reliable kick in our team over 35, 40 metres. That's a 25 to 40 metres range of distance is so important in footy. If you turn it over, particularly on the halfback flank, it also costs you a goal. But the key is that if you turn it over and the scoring chain breaks, you don't score. So, you lose that opportunity to score. So the big thing from a sort of structural point of view was exactly, as he's saying, is there were much more kicks to the corridor, but it'll be in those players' hands. So, on Friday was Bowie, McVeigh, Cozzy and Hunter all kicked to the corridor multiple times and hit targets to them. And there's no stats on the game other than what was posted from Big Footy, I think. But if we could see the scoring chains, I guarantee you that the 4 players would be 60, 70% of scoring chains they would have been involved in. Not just with the corridor kick, of course. And that is so critical to our ability to put on score and not give the ball back. The other structural thing that I think is a tweak from last year is our mid setup. You've got there, maybe he's taking a leaf out of Scott's game plan from last year, which, Goody's often criticised for being a bit sort of stuck in his ways. I just don't think that's a fair criticism. Of course, he's got his own philosophies. But as you say, they rolled Cozzy through there, which is going to be huge. Suddenly, if he goes from averaging 8, 9 to 15 plus possessions, that's the other thing about the 4 players I mentioned, and Salem, they're all going to average 15 plus possessions. So, you're going to get 60 kicks or 55, 50 kicks from that group of players. 80% of them will hit the target, So suddenly the probability looks a lot better. You haven't got, a player like, even Jordan's not such a super great kick over that short distance. And Langdon is not a great kick over, 35 metres, 40 metres. He's not reliable. So suddenly, our ability to keep the ball, not turn it over, but also create scoring chains goes up significantly. Running those players through the midfield more. So Rivers was almost used as a pinch hitter. That was a really good sort of way of describing it. Cozzy more. Sparrow spent time in the middle, and it's almost, Viney rolled in and out of there. It's almost as if it's structured around those two, Gus didn't spend hardly any time in there, really. Structured around Oliver and Track, and, they were awesome. So, that'll be really interesting to see. I really like them running Rivers through there. The other interesting thing from a tactical perspective that struck me was a bit about the kicking as well, and I watched the Melbourne game on replay and then watched the Collingwood game, and they use handball so much more to get to move the ball forward. What was interesting with the way Melbourne were playing, and I'm trying to remember how much we did of this last year, was moving up the ball up the ground with short kicks rather than, and the key is not moving it on when there's not an option, which frustrates fans because they want to see the ball in constant motion. The way Collingwood play, the ball's in motion all the time. But if you watch that game again, the way Melbourne played, is that we were quite prepared to kick it for 20 metres and then wait and hold it. And I think that's a real hallmark of the way Goody coaches is. He says to his players, if you look up the ground, if there's not a really good option, the percentage play is to wait. Like, what's the risk? It isn't as exciting. It isn't as great to watch. But the flip side is that if you have the ball in motion, as we were talking about last year, it's a real equivalent to basketball. If the ball's in motion, it's hard to stop the opposition scoring. And the best example of that, if you go back to that Collingwood game that I mentioned from last year, is we played a ball in motion game. We played Collingwood's game fast. We went super fast in that first half. We should have been, we should have been 8 goals up at halftime. But because the ball was in motion all the time, they hurt us on the slingshot rebound. And unfortunately for us, they were incredibly accurate. They were 8-2 or something at halftime in that game. If they were 4-6, we would have won that game. But they were 8-2. But that's the problem with fast ball movement, like Collingwood, and they'll get exposed on this year, I'm sure, is that it exposes you to goals on the rebound. As Goody's style, there's still a lot of aggression there, and I think that aggression will come from those corridor kicks you mentioned, and will enter the 50 in a lot more dangerous spots. There will also continue to be, as you mentioned before, we play in channels, and we're going to go down the boundary. We're going to go in straight lines. I reckon we switched no more than 3 times a match. So if people thinking, we're going to be switching more, doesn't look like that will be a big feature of the way we play. And we will still continue to kick to the pocket, for instance, if that's the percentage of play. Having said that, it seemed to me there were a lot more central kicks to the corridor, directly in front of goals, to the hotspot, the classic hotspot, 30 to 40 metres out. So, maybe they're looking to be a bit more aggressive with that kick inside 50. Just 2 more final comments about that is that I'm not quite sure of Moorabbin's dimension, but it's quite a small ground, and particularly when you're standing at ground level, which I haven't done for ages. The last time was at the game you and I went to last year, is that people, talk about, well, why aren't they spotting up the leading forward? They go, well, there are no lanes anymore for players to run into, but particularly on a small ground like Moorabbin, there is no lane for them to run into space that you can drill a 20-metre kick onto their chest. So, unless you get the ball moving quick off the half-back line and you create an outnumber and you get it forward. Just the very final thing is that there was talk during the training reports and I think you might have mentioned it a couple of times, about us playing with a model a little bit more like Geelong, with our forwards up high in the half-forward flank, moving it quickly and kicking over their heads as they run back to goal to hold the space behind them. I didn't see any evidence of that in the game, but it might have been a feature of the wind, for instance, made that difficult, and also just the sort of the tightness of that ground. But, I don't think that there'll be radical tweaks to our game plan at all. Not radical tweaks to the way we move the ball inside 50, but we'll still, if there's no other option, we'll still kick to a pack. That's the option. We'll still be a territory first team, but the big difference will, and I think it's a great difference, is more kicks to the corridor, but only because we've now starting to get the players who are going to hit that reliably.
Just a note on the wind, it really was tricky. Against the wind, it was dropping noticeably short. You might have noticed sometimes even the boundary umpires were having difficulty throwing it in. And conversely, the other way, Track's goal, Grundy's goal. Grundy's
goal was the one he was
just chipping
he was
it.
kicking to the leading forward.
Yeah, and it just caught in the wind and went through for a goal. So
Track wasn't though. Track's goal, he was going for goal.
Oh, he was going for goal. But
the other one was and I was right behind it. He flushed it. Was Rivers' goal right at the end of the game.
Yeah.
He kicked that off 3 steps, and that was such a beautiful hit. So where he was standing, actually, when he kicked that, there were 3 direct on the fulls. Nibbler did one, Chandler did one, and the opposition did one. That was where the wind was blowing into that pocket. And as you say, it was strong. It was really strong.
And I think T-Mac as well had 2 set shots against the wind, and they just wouldn't, usually he's a very straight kick, and I was actually surprised that he missed it by so much. So anyway.
What was the final score? How many points did we score? I thought our kicking was actually really accurate.
Kicking for the most part. Early on it wasn't. I think we missed quite a few set shots. I think we missed 4 set shots very early, and I was like, here we go again.
Yeah.
Because there was all that talk in the pre-season with Choco, taking over the goal kicking coaching role.
And speaking of Choco, one of the things I love about track is we'll get onto the players now, I guess. I'll start with track, is when you're close to him, like watching down on that ground level, and a fair bit of, I can't remember if it was the second quarter, maybe it was the third quarter, was right on that wing, right in front of me. And his ability to stand up in tackles and not be brought to the ground is just unbelievable. Yeah. But just on the kicking, the first goal that he kicked gun barrel straight, and I was sort of right behind him as he was walking in. His technique looked just so much better than last season. He walked straight in a straight line. He wasn't spinning the ball, and he drilled it. And one of the things I love about track is how expressive he is. And I'd love to play poker against him.
Yeah, he can't mask that.
yeah, and he was thrilled. Like he was thrilled that he'd kicked it, and you could just see he was pumped. It was like, I'm getting there.
The D's posted on social media a week or 2 ago him having a set shot, a goal. I posted it on Demonland in the goal kicking, goal kicking, just to ask the question of people who have been critical of his style, because they often say that he drops it from quite high up, whether there has been an improvement in it. And someone said he's still dropping it a bit too high, but there had been some improvement in his technique.
Well, funnily enough, when in his first season, his technique was really much better, I thought. It was, 2 or 3 steps, much better rhythm, and I don't recall him having such a sort of extravagant drop or spinning the ball in his hand, both of which he seemed, at least on Friday, seemed to have stopped. Just one more thought on Hunter and Cozzy is the other thing about them both in terms of creating more scoring is, those 2 players in particular, is how creative they are and how confident they are to go for high-risk kicks. Well, particularly Cozzy.
For Hunter as well, if you happen to watch the 2021 Grand Final once or twice, which I suspect you might have, and if you can bear watching the first few goals of the second quarter that they kicked, Treloar's 2 goals were a direct result of Lockie Hunter on the 50, on the boundary, kicking high and into the right at the spot, just in front of the Norton didn't actually mark it, but the ball came to ground. Yep. Treloar's snapped it on.
And it's that kick that I was talking about before, is that in modern footy now, the really skilled kicks don't have many options to drill a low flat kick to a leading forward. We had a few on the weekend. That's when we were able to generate an extra at the contest in defence and move it up and generate an extra in offence. But the rest of the time, you're kicking into a crowd. Particularly, the other factor about the way we play is the rebound. You really saw it, is that teams struggle to get it out of our forward line because we bounce it straight back in. But when that happens, it's, by definition, the forward line is jam-packed full of players. There might be 30 players in that forward 50, so there's no space to kick to. Hunter's got that ability to be able to weight the ball over the top of people, which is in the example you talked about. They cover the zone off the front of it, they kick over the top of it into a pocket, behind it. The other thing I love about Hunter is that he's got the skill of, he's got that ability of all of the best really good left footers to exploit that sort of split second of time that lefties get as their sort of defender in front of them shapes to sort of cover off a right foot kick. And he did that a few times where, he really exploits that. And he's got a nice jink too, the way he sort of creates that space and turns inboard. He looks inboard, and that's what, he did a lot of those kicks at the Dogs. And I mean, the other good thing about Hunter, I think Spring Jack's spot on. I mean, he's going to be, and you too, he's going to be a recruit, such a great recruit. Like, it's amazing. It looked hilarious because he had a shaved head and so did.
I wonder if that was if that's
and so did Langdon. And now it creates a real problem for the opposition because last year the other teams were obviously voiding Langdon, and coming up the other wing. Well, now they're not going to be so keen to go up. He's going to be more a concern scoring wise than Langdon. So he's going to be huge for us, I think, just in terms of the ability to hit targets and not turn it over.
Well, I've got in my notes here when I'm talking about Hunter, I was doing it later, but I'll do it now. Last year, teams either tried to avoid, like you said, avoid Langdon on the wing, or they, by not going down his wing, or they attempted to quell his influence by manning him up. Hawthorn did that quite well. In 2023, you do this at your own peril because we've got another equally excellent endurance player with even better disposal on the other wing. And we saw, you can't tag both of them. You can't avoid both of them. So they're going to have trouble in trying to sort of quell the influence of the two of them. Someone sort of suggested maybe playing a taller player on one of them, but that's it. You can only do it really on one of them. And
yeah, exactly. And the other thing I think how they'll use Hunter is that they'll want him as much as possible kicking the ball inside 50. Obviously. So he won't be. I don't think he'll be doing the sort of running and the sort of distance Langdon does. But that means players like Nibbler has to cover off on those kilometres. And there was an example I forget, maybe it was the third quarter, we were going towards the scoring end. He cheated at the ruck contest. He was on the wing at the setup, and it looked like we were going to win the ball, but it was still in dispute. It was in the middle of the ground, and he cheated on the goal side. And if it had bobbled out to him, he would have been free. His opponent went the other way, and it turned out they won the ball.
But I'm happy for him to do that because on the chances that it does, we do win it.
No, exactly. That's the point I'm making is he would have done that because he's been green lighted to do that. So you don't do that sort of stuff with Goody. He won't play you. That's the thing. You do what you're told to do. Otherwise, you're not in the team. That's, I think, it's Goody's number one rule. And they'll use him offensively because why? Because that's the percentage play. You get him into space, kicking inside 50 is much better than him kicking on half-back flank. We've got Bowie and McVeigh kicking from the half-back flank when Salo comes back in. We don't need him down there to hit targets. We need him up on the half-forward flank kicking to Brown or McDonald or Fritter. The other thing about the score line, as you noted, we didn't have Fritter. He's our it seems people seem to forget he's our best forward, has been for the last 2 years, not just on the scoreboard. He's brilliant forward.
Yeah. If you want to join the show, give us a call 0390163666, 0390163666, so you can discuss anything you want to talk about. We do have some questions from some of our people on Demonland, and I'll pepper them through when we talk about particular players. Or if you want to get in the chat room, demonland.com/podcast, a couple of guys in there. You can ask us a question in there or just make a comment or whatever you want to do. Let's go on. Players, we'll just whip through some of them. Others I'll ask you in particular about. But Stephen May, ever dependable general in the back line. He's racked up 21 disposals and 5 marks. Admittedly, Max King and Tim Embry were not playing, and they had defender Dougal Howard and rookie Mateus Philippa, who actually did quite a good job. They were their only key forwards for the Saints, and it was pretty much easy pickings for veterans like May, and then Petty, another one of our ever-dependable defenders, spoiling and marking when required. Lever looked good until his glass ankle shattered again, and I haven't heard anything about that from the club since. Seems to be a recurrence of the injury that saw him miss a bit of pre-season post-Christmas. So hopefully there's nothing too bad there.
Hopefully not a recurrence of the club not telling us anything about injuries.
That wouldn't happen, would it? Jake Bowie, he put his hand up back for a permanent position in the side after falling out of favour in the back half of last year. I thought he was a great one-on-one. His field kicking, as you mentioned, is excellent. And big man, I know, you said it multiple times tonight, you love a player that's accurate by foot. Bay Riffin on Demonland has asked if we think Bowie and Chandler, but hold off on the Chandler talk, we'll get to him a bit later. Do you think Bowie will play round one? And we'll talk about Judd McVie as well, so just Bowie at the moment.
100% he will, 100%. My gut feeling is that last year maybe it was part of a development thing to drop him, and he wasn't in such bad form when he got dropped. It wasn't an unfair dropping or anything, but, he could have equally kept his spot. I think, maybe it was a bit of a wake up to the young fella, as it's not all about winning, but he looks in fantastic shape, particularly without Salem in the team. He's really important down there. He's a great decision maker. He's really reminded me how good one-on-one he is. He took a couple of really nice one-on-one marks. He reads the ball well. He just hits those 30-metre targets, and they're just so critical. You turn the ball over in the half-back flank, any half-decent team will make you pay.
Yeah.
He also looks physically in good nick. So he's an absolute lock. McVeigh, I could not have been more impressed with, and everyone's been raving about him on Demonland, but he's a smooth mover. I noted on Demonland that you won't be able to see this on the replay, but very early on in the game, in about 2 or 3 minutes into the game, he had pushed well up. So he was on Higgins. So he was given a pretty tough AFL-ready, seasoned AFL player to match up on, and gave Higgins a right old touch-up. But he was really, which is a great sign for his defensive skills. But he pushed up high quite often, and at about the 2 or 3 minute mark, he'd pushed all the way up to the half-forward flank, and he did a beautiful 20-metre kick inboard, exactly into that corridor that you're talking about. 20 metres doesn't sound too much, but he hit a target through traffic. And I forget the chain of events after that in terms of who was involved, but it ended up 2 or 3 possessions later with someone having a set shot on goal. As that player was lining up for his set shot on goal, I happened to had my binoculars on McVeigh, and multiple senior players ran to McVeigh and congratulated him, because it was clearly a set play. Like they were saying, yeah, great, what we've been practicing in training has worked, but it was also a pump up for the young fella. Yeah. And, the guy, it turns out that whoever was shooting for goal missed the shot, so it didn't even, but, it was interesting. And, he's got a really fluid action. I love his kicking action. He's a smooth mover. So I think round one will be McVeigh on one half-back flank, essentially playing the Salem role, or, maybe Bowers playing that role, but both of them on the half-back flank. It'll be really interesting to see Rivers. He looks absolutely locked. So it'll be really interesting to see whether Hibbo can even make his way into that team. But I guess we'll get to that.
It's been a real love fest for McVeigh. It seems like a Jason Taylor rookie selection special. My thoughts on him: he's got clean hands in the air. He's got a good pair of hands. He's clean on ground level. He backs himself. He plays with a level of confidence that belies his age.
That's because he can kick.
Yeah, and I think he's really made as a case for round one. D. Old Fart asked the question whether we, what's our gut feel on him, whether it might translate to him being a genuine chance for round one. You've said yes. I've said yes. And the Chief adds, the Casey Reserve game last Friday showed that Hibbo is still an AFL standard defender, injuries permitting, and should be playing in the first, particularly given his versatility as a defender and his elite ability to consistently beat his opponents. However, McVeigh looks to be ready to start his AFL career, and we need to continually blood young players to avoid a complete collapse when our current stars come to an end. It's also beneficial to give young players a run of games in the first, let's say 4 games, so we don't put too much pressure on them to hold their initial promotion and help build their confidence. If you agree with all that, then someone has to make way to get both Hibberd and McVeigh into the side now. Who of our current regular first players gets dropped, and is that player who makes way likely to be looking down the barrel of their first seniors playing career coming to an end at the MFC? Me personally, I tend to think that Hibbo is not done yet. I still think he is best 23. However, I think the footy department might have made a statement by not picking him in the ones this week. Or what do you think in regards to that? Can we play Bowie, Hibbo, McVeigh all together?
Well, it's not just him because you've got Rivers
and
back there as
Rivers
well, who's
as well,
absolutely in the team.
Well, Rivers is in the team. There's no doubt about that, and we'll talk about him soon. But Hibbo, what's?
I'm totally guilty of writing off Hibbo almost at exactly this time.
Oh, we wrote him off, and he came back with a vengeance.
So at the very real, I won't make that mistake again. But what I will say in terms of I don't agree with Chief on is that second game was a woeful, the standard was woeful. So it wasn't an AFL standard game. And, the first game was, I found it really hard. I mean, speaking of simulation, because I was side on and I don't know the St Kilda player, a number of their new players, and they're all in black. They look like computer simulator. It was hard to tell who was structured up, what they were doing. It looked like we were playing a video game and they were RPCs or whatever.
NPCs.
It's like, but in the second game, there was so much more space, so much more time. I mean, he definitely stood out. So did Jordan for that matter, but they should have, because they were playing at
premiership players effectively.
Well, but also the intensity, like it was really interesting watching. I watched just for shits and giggles, watched 3 of the practice games, and all of them were pretty low intensity. We clearly came into this game with pretty to play it pretty close to a dress rehearsal.
From all reports from our track watchers, and I know just at training, but the track watchers who've been to the match sims, it's all been very, very intense, and some of our trainings has been really intense in terms of the tackling. So,
and it's obviously
we're not mucking around.
It's obviously a theme for the club because every bloody player says, intensity. I think,
but it's true. I've seen it with my own eyes.
Exactly.
I don't know. So haven't been at other teams' trainings, but if you go by their practice matches,
so the fact that he wasn't picked in the ones suggests to me that you're right. My sense is
a bit of a statement.
Where does he come back in if McVeigh? If no one comes out of the back line that played on Friday, the way I could see it working if Hibbo was to come back in is you got to remember Gus played basically as a half-back flanker, deep pocket, almost a back pocket.
But I think he will. So, he's not going to play midfield.
Well, we did last season, the end of last season. So he could go in and do more minutes in the midfield.
He's been training in defence. I think he's back in defence, yeah.
Is that where he's been training predominantly down?
Look, it's hard to tell because some of the drills particularly the ones at Gosh's, they're not doing full match simulations. They're doing full length sort of what used to be sort of circle work, but up and down. And he sort of hung around sort of halfback, a bit in the middle, but it's hard to tell.
Right. Well, that makes it
usually with the defenders when they split off,
it does make it tricky for Hibbo because it would be if Gus spent majority of his time in the midfield and utility,
I don't think that's
then
the case.
Hibbo could slot in the back line, but in the absence of that happening, it will be tough. I mean,
and with Salem out, I think Brayshaw is in defence.
Yeah, and to be honest, I didn't like Gus in the midfield. He played that one good game, but I like him as a defender because he marks so well.
He took 9 marks the other day.
Yeah, and he reads the ball coming in so well. It doesn't expose his lack of pace back there either, which gets exposed a bit in the middle. He's a good long kick from half-back flank on both sides. He's not a particularly accurate kick, so you need the McVeigh and the Bowies, Salems around him. But Hibbo's going to find it tough to get back in. So's Jordan.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, this game was best 23.
Yeah,
pretty much lining up as they're going to line up. Where did Gus play? Did he play any time in the midfield? No. We had players pinch hitting in the midfield. Well,
hardly any time.
Hit him pinch hit in the midfield. He didn't not one centre bounce attendance.
Yeah,
to my knowledge.
So the question on Chandler, it's hard to tell. Players like Harms is the other one. Like Harms didn't have a good game. He was the rustiest player.
I'll get to them in a sec. Let's just video. Brayshaw we just talked about 16 possession, 9 marks. My notes here, trained all pre-season in defence. It looks like he's stuck there, more so with Salem's absence. There could be times he's got a pinch hit in the midfield as needed, but I doubt it, and he's not going to play on the wing anymore.
He's not going to be a shock trooper like throwing Cozzy in there
or
Rivers,
throwing
even Rivers. He's not going to give that same instant sort of. He's a more of a working I don't know, he's more of meat and potatoes inside mid. That's not, we've got enough of them, really.
So let's go on to Rivers. When I first heard about him, one of the track watchers on a Friday who went out to the match sim sort of whetted all of our appetites with sort of saying Rivers played a bit in the middle, and we were all very excited about that, and we wanted to see more of it, and we got our first glimpse on Friday. I was wrapped with it. He's had 19 possessions, 9 marks as well. So both him and Gus had 9 marks. He's kicked a lovely long goal. We mentioned, what are your thoughts on Rivers and more midfield minutes? Obviously, he's not going to be full-time midfield. How do you... Yeah, it's going to be...
I could see him playing a role where it's sort of a bit similar to how Hunt played his best footy, sort of a running half-back flanker. Not quite the same, not as much run and carry and not as fast, obviously. But, Hunt playing his best footy at the Ds was that sort of rebounding halfback flanker who was offensive. He gets up the ground. The thing I really like about Rivers pushing up the ground and doing some midfield minutes is it really, really takes advantage of his how long his kick is. He's got such a beautiful deep kick. He's not particularly accurate over that short distance. So you don't really want him having many of those kicks. But what you do want is, off 2 steps, he kicks at 60 metres. Yeah. For a team that's all about territory, you're getting it from, and he collects it in the midfield. Like I always say, the middle of the ground at a centre clearance. It's down in the, forward pocket right in front of goals with one kick. He is a beautiful kick of the footy. As I said before, he looks in good nick. So I really like the idea of him running through because he also creates a matchup problem. I mean, you've got 2, I guess no one's tagging these days, but if the whole focus of opposition coaches must be on what the hell they're going to do with Track and Oliver. They're just amazing to watch. They get better every year almost. But then how do you deal with someone who comes in specifically to create some sort of scoring opportunities and quick ball movement or damage, I guess, like Cozzy and Rivers that create something new?
Oliver, Pedragavani, we don't really need to critique these 3. I reeled off their stats earlier. They're just absolutely elite. Gawn and Grundy, 35 hitouts, 3 goals between them. Bimmer, how do you see this ruck pairing work? How do you want them to be used, or more importantly, how do you think that they'll be used?
It's an interesting one. I mean, I think that we've won in this deal. Like, there's no... I'm a big rap on Jackson, as we've talked about often enough, leaving his decisions aside. He's not going to hit his peak for another 3-4 years, Jackson. So that's just the way it goes for big fellas. He's, 20, at least 2 years away from his peak. Grundy's in his peak now. He's super fit. I've never been a huge rap on him. Like, I've always thought he's slightly overrated. In terms of when he was All-Australian at the Pies, he got underrated subsequently, couldn't get a game at the Pies. So for me, I think it's a really good combination, in terms of the working out how successful and how much he improves us. For me, a lot will depend on how well that synergy and chemistry develops with Max, because it's not just about what Grundy brings to the table in terms of his footy. It's really how much the 2 of them can combine to be a powerful duo, but also how much that gives extra to Max. So if it's a pure 50-50 split on ruck time, for instance, what do you reckon? Was it, I don't know, was it 50-50 on Friday?
Well, you just have a look at their stats in terms of hitouts. Gawn, and they're winning most hitouts. Yeah. Grundy had 20, Gawn had 15.
Yeah, so 50-50. Let's say 50-50. And that, they made a lot of noise last year. I mean, Gawn was banged up. And
he was, I know for facts,
he just looked terrible. He looked like,
barely walk at the end.
And the club said, Richardson said, I think that, that they want to, he's getting to the stage of the career where they need to look after him a little bit. So, but he's a clever footballer. So he push back, push forward, that Grundy gives him the ability to do that. So much will depend, I think, on the way they can, get their chemistry working out where it's instinctive. I remember Gawny talking about his ruck relationship with Jackson was often they would make the call on field would swap, not the coaches.
Mm.
So, you know, once they get to that stage, Grundy, where there's sort of almost like a unconscious understanding of what they're going to do, I think they'll be a hugely formidable duo. It's obviously an important part of the way Goody's thinking about structure and the whole setup. You know, hopefully he'll get a bit of protection as well in packs. One thing I really hope, early on in the game, Maxi got another clobber to the back of the head.
Absolutely did.
And hold him down. Should have been 50.
No, he never gets a free for that. And then you see people just get a little love tap, and it's a free straight
it's just
away.
Ridiculous. Like, you know, I really hope the club this year's talked to the AFL about looking after him. But, you know, leaving that aside, Grundy will help him with a bit more so than Jackson, because Grundy's a seasoned footballer who can take the pack, hold the pack off, you know, take his share of those hits himself. They're using T-Mac. They use T-Mac a lot as inside 50 for the boundary line throw-ins. So that splits, it's almost like a third ruckman. Grundy did a little bit of that up forward. I don't know him, you know, I'm not convinced that he's a natural forward.
I don't think anyone thinks he is, from what I've heard.
No.
He never
No, and Maxi's not either. But so, I think he's a great pickup. He, you know, he's obviously super fit, so it's another player running those 15 kilometres a game that, you know, you need. He's probably fitter than, definitely fitter than Jackson, I'd say. And so, you know, I think much will depend on how well those two combine. In a way, though, you know, I think it's, speaking before about taking things from other clubs, the way I see them playing is not, you know, that dissimilar to the setup at the Cats, the way they use Blick halves and who's the other ruckman down there? Stanley, you know, in the way that sort of, that combination, you know, Grundy's almost like a Blick halves in terms of his running ability and even size.
We've discussed Hunter Langdon. The only other thing to add, Clintosaurus says, interested in the thoughts of B-Man on whether Hunter will see our forward ball movement change. We sort of talked that a bit. Noticed more than a few times we kicked to him on the half-forward flank and he centred to almost 20 metres out, as we met. It resulted in shots on goal straight in front. My thoughts are we will still go to the pocket, but also to 20 or so metres out directly in front, not including fast breaks on turnover. So I think we've covered that.
It's exactly how I see it. And it's all about, you know, going back to the percentages, is that's a hard thing to teach players. Like, you know, it's really about, you know, the best players in the history of AFL are always the ones who make the best decisions. But what does making a good decision actually mean? It means making, you know, the high percentage play and making the right choice under pressure. And that's what Goody's obviously drilled into the players, is making the right choices. And the right choice for someone on the half-forward flank kicking inside 50 is somewhat dependent on your ability to hit a target. If you, like Saints turned it over twice, doing exactly that same kick that Hunter did to Brown inside corridor, and cost them a scoring straight away, because we moved it straight from 20 metres outside our defensive goal to our end immediately. So that's the, you know, if you miss that target, it is, you'll get hurt often. So I totally agree with what Clintosaurus says. I think that a big part of the play will be going through him to bring it inside 50. And it's a bit touching on what you were saying before. You know, opposition worrying about Langdon. Now, from an offensive thing, they're going to have to, maybe we need to push out to that side. Well, if they do that, then you have McVeigh pushing up on that same side, because that's the side he was playing on, who can hit that target inside, or a Cozzy who can hit that target inside.
Sparrow seemed a little quiet on Friday. I was very bullish about Sparrow this pre-season based on the shape that he came back in. He's an absolute beast. He's put on a lot of muscle up top. At training, he's one of those guys that just gives 150%. He tackles extremely hard. In this match, he only had 10 disposals. He kicked 2 behinds, but I guess if they were 2 goals, I'd be jumping up and down a bit more. I'm not concerned. I still think he's the number one relief for the big three. So what are your thoughts on Sparrow? Is he the next guy in the midfield mix?
Yeah, I mean, look, Goody drives people nuts, I think, with his, one of the big themes about last year was not rolling players through and trying different things. And he likes Sparrow as the chop out for Viney.
Mm.
You know, that much is clear. But he didn't have a great game. What I will say, he didn't have a great game, and nor did Harms.
Oh, that's
I'll
the
touch on him
next
in a
guy.
second.
Yep.
But in both of their defence, what I will say is that they've got tough positions to play, because what does success look like for those two players? They're never going to get any more than 10, 12 players, because they're coming in and
10, 12 possessions.
Yeah, exactly. In Sparrow's case, he's chopping out, giving Viney a chop out. You know, so, you know, what we don't know is what their role is and what their internal KPIs are from the club. And if, you know, we don't know if they're meeting them, you know, so it might be kilometres run, for instance. It might have ability, you know, he might have been running with the player, exactly, or pressure index, or, you know, there might be things that they were, you know, that their own. So that utility position, Jordan's in exactly the same boat, is a tough one. You know, it's a bit like a feast or famine position, like a small forward, isn't it? So, but having said that, Sparrow, you know, he didn't do anything terrible, but he was probably, him and Harms were probably our two weakest players on the day.
Yeah, well, Harms had only 6 possessions. He could be the one that loses a spot in the side if we aren't going to use him as a tagger, which we really didn't do anyway in 2022. And then if the experiments with some of the other pinch hitters like Pickett and Rivers is a hit, then where does that leave Harms in the equation?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
We've tried him in defence.
Exactly. If you're running Rivers through and Cozzy through, you're doing it to create, you know, sort of shock scoring opportunities. Yeah. Well, Harms isn't that player, is he? So those two players, if they play more midfield, which seems to be they will, you know, that doesn't leave any minutes for Harms.
McDonald and Brown. It was great to have McDonald and Brown both fit in the same size. From all reports at training, they're going gangbusters. Brown is definitely on limited minutes at training. He's not. He's doing some drills. I think they're just trying to get him through a very long season and a long pre-season. But having said that, he's then coming up and playing in all the match sims, and he'll play in all the games. He is fit, but they're just obviously his knees. They're just trying to get him through. We only got to see them together for the first half before McDonald had to relieve Lever in defence. Brown took 6 marks. He kicked 2 goals. T-Mac kicked 1 goal, 2. Could have been 3 if not for some difficult swirly conditions for set shot kicking. Brown's a much better player and more valuable with T-Mac in the side as the centre forward playing up the ground, as well as providing another big body deep in the forward line to take some heat off Ben Brown. We know that when Ben Brown gets double, triple teamed, it makes it very hard. You add Fritsch to the mix and our forward line will look a lot more dangerous.
It was like a real reminder, wasn't it, of how much we missed McDonald last year. From structural, you know, we talked about that enough. He's running up and down the ground ability. But just having those 2 tall players, you know, like Clintosaurus says, that's right. We'll still go to the pocket, or even if it's, you know, kicking to a contest 20 metres out directly in front, our ability for a ground player to win the contested ball is all dependent on them making sure the opposition don't mark it. And, you know, like it's structurally important, but, you know, obviously offensively important as well. You've got 2 players who kick accurately when they get their chances, you know, create match-up problems. It must be a hell of a job trying to work out. You've got to cover 2 players now with Grundy pushing back as well, Gorn sometimes. That's a lot of height to cover. You know, I think that we saw what happened last year is that, you know, Brown was flogged to death right at the end and, you know, playing a lone hand up there. So
because he was running up the field to take marks up the wing and half back. And then having to get
the
down.
other thing about it is that's interesting is it's a bit the same as similar in a way to Bowie and Salem. Bowie is a better player with Salem in the team. And I think, you know, Brown is a better player with McDonald in the team because, you know, well, if no other reason is that, you know, one good tall has to go to one of them. Probably, but it's one of those situations where you know, the sum of the parts is greater, isn't it? Because, you know, it creates a big challenge. And I really like the sort of attitude McDonald's sort of brought in the last couple of seasons. He's really, I think he's improved his body language, and I'll talk a little bit about Tomlinson in a second in the same context. But a big knock I always had on Tom McDonald was his body language early in his career, and the way he interacted with players when he was annoyed with them. He seems to have really sorted that out. There were a few times where he got a free kick against him where years gone past he'd react. He didn't in that circumstance. By all account, he's in great nick, from what you've said, and that it seems like he's unhindered by his foot, which is just must be such a relief for him. I heard that there was an interview on him, which is terrific, by the way. It was a podcast that on Demonland. Someone posted it, and he just talked about how hard it was. That he's still in a lot of pain. It was only a month ago he recorded the interview. Still in a lot of pain. There's a lot of rehabbing that goes with it. But he seems confident with it running. He didn't look at all hindered. Played all 4 quarters, didn't he? Including pushing back.
Yeah.
So.
Van Rooyen, I'm bullish about this kid. He looks excellent at training. He's a great pair of hands, and if he doesn't mark it, he's very good at getting the ball to ground, and then his ground ball work when the ball hits the deck is excellent for a player of his size. He might have seemed a bit out of depth when he came on late in the match, and I wasn't around for the 2. So, B-Man, what were your observations of his second game? Because he only had 2 or 3 possessions in the first one.
It's interesting, actually, with Van Rooyen. But one thing I'll say is that when he did come on for a lever, is that it gave me an opportunity to. So I did some practice of my own of yelling, getting into good form for yelling, and I was able to yell Van Rooyen when he almost ruined whoever was in front of him. It was one of those situations where it was in the centre square. He wasn't going to mark the ball, but he still willed himself to the contest and smashed into the player. And I think that's the hallmark of everyone who says anything about him, coaches, teammates on Demonland. One of the first things they say is how competitive he was, just as you said, and his will to get to the contest. Having said all of that, maybe it was a case of him trying too hard. And in some ways, it's interesting reflecting back about all of the pressure he was, the club played Van Rooyen last year, put him in.
And he probably wasn't ready.
He's a Monty to play round 1 in 23. He's not going to play round 1.
I don't think so. Well, not with
Rich
T-Mac.
Got to come back in. Brown's not going to get dropped. McDonald's not going to get dropped.
Not with the 3 of them, and I don't think you can play all 4 of them.
Well, and the other person in the equation is Melksham. I mean, Melksham was in our best 22 at the end of last year. He played a small half forward. So, it's a good problem to have. You've got this tiger ready to impose himself on the competition. But my thought after the game was he's got a little bit to go. He looked much better in the second in the scratch match, it felt like. But again, I'd really caution any sort of takeaways from that game because it was played at low pressure and the last quarter was played with no umpires. So, he kicked a couple of nice goals. He read the ball well. He's a nice, neat kick. He took his chances, but he's got a bit to go, I think, in terms of forcing his way into that team.
We'll just quickly go through some of the other guys. Nibbler.
He was awesome.
Yeah,
Nibbler was awesome.
I said he was serviceable, 15 possessions, 1 goal, could easily have been 2 goals, which for Nibbler is exactly what we want for him. Hit the scoreboard, provide some defensive pressure in the forward line. I don't have any defensive pressure stats for the game, but we know.
Yeah, look, I think he's going to be a player that is criminally underrated for the rest of his career. He was fantastic in that game, and I'm a big Nibbler fan, and also that I think that a lot of people don't really understand the role that he's being asked to do. Like, he was more than serviceable in my view. Like, one of the things that it's easy to sort of discount the incredible amount of running that he does and the importance to the team that is. Now, in a way, it's a bit of like damning with faint praise because it's like, well, he's just a runner, but his running ability is why we're able to outnumber in defense and in offense. It's incredible, but it also means that, as I was saying before, that Hunter doesn't have to do as much running, so therefore isn't as exhausted as he otherwise would be if he was doing the sort of running that Langdon does. but can spend more time kicking the ball inside 50 as opposed to collecting the ball on the halfback flank. But one of the things with Nibbler that's easy to miss is, like people think of him as purely a defensive running type player, and that's great. But it's how creative he is. And in terms of in the first 3 scoring chains he was involved in, he set up, he gave a direct goal assist. In one circumstance, because I'm a big Nibbler fan, I have my binoculars. I was talking to my friend that I was with and said, look, let's just watch a Nibbler. I was trying to explain how much running he does. Let's watch him for a minute. In that play, he went from the ball was going to the goal scoring end. We were going to the goal scoring end towards the city. He ran from the halfback flank. It took a mark in the the mark in the back pocket. Ran all the way up to the ground, stopped, competed, kept on going, and ended up creating an out number in the forward pocket now on the 50-metre line. Now, it ended up going out, but it was a 2-on-1 out number with Hunter being the player. Hunter almost got the ball before it got out, all on the back of the running that Nibbler did. It was just incredible to watch because he had to, sprint basically up the ground to track the ball and still compete, still have the wherewithal and ability to compete to create the out number up on the 50-metre forward line. Hunter's first goal was set up by Nibbler. So, he got that goal walking in. That was all Nibbler's work. But both in terms of the goal assist or the scoring chain that he created, but the thing that's important is that also came on the end of a 200-metre run. I was watching him track that ball up the ground and still have the ability to hit a target inside 50 that ultimately led to Hunter's goal. I thought he was fantastic, and it's no surprise he finished top 10 in the in the Bluey last year. I bristle a little bit at the suggestion that that's not indicative of the fact of the level to which he plays and the level to which the coaches think of him. And just speaking of that interview with Tommy Mack, he talked about I'd encourage anyone, I'll find it, maybe we'll put it back up, but to listen to it. And he specifically talked about the hardest role in the team by far. He said the hardest role by far is Nibbler's role and Spargo's role, is that they have to defensively get up to the defense, and then when the ball is won in defense, they have to beat it back to get in front of it to create the scoring out number at the other end. That is phenomenal. And Tommy Mack, it was in the context of how much running AFL footballers have to do now and the incredible demands of the sport in terms of the aerobic capacity and the sheer amount of kilometres they run. And he was talking about it being, there's sprints and there's fast strider, and he's fast strider. And he said there's no one in the team anywhere close to Nibbler's amount of kilometres at a fast stride. And he also talked about Spargo. So I thought that was really interesting insight to how important Nibbler is to the team, how we want to play, but how easy it is to dismiss that as if that's, that he's just a running player. Again, Tommy Mack said, by far, that was his words, the hardest position in their team to play.
You can listen to the Tom McDonald interview on the Tosses podcast. It's season 2, episode 3. So I'm assuming just put Tosses. Well, maybe not do that because you might get something unsavoury. But maybe Tosses podcast season 2, episode 3, and make sure you clear your browser history after you do that.
Adonsky says in the chat room that you can't be into good kicks and also a Nibbler fan. But man, well, that's.
Is he talking about Nibbler's set shots or his infield kicking?
Well, he isn't a very good kick. He is redlining all the time. Go sprint 100 metres, pick up a golf club, and see how well you hit it down the green.
I don't think I'd hit it that well down the green if I hadn't run down the fairway.
It's like he is. You watch him. Just watch him for a while in a game of footy. He is almost always in the red zone in terms of he's exhausted. Like that sort of sucking wind is an affectation. But technically he isn't a good kick. And that sort of goes back to my point about, you don't have him kicking into the corridor. So if you don't have enough players who can reliably hit that kick, you just don't pull that trigger, and you don't want Nibbler hitting that risky kick inside.
Spargo didn't get a heap of the footy, but when he did, he uses the ball very effectively, hit up quite a few players going inside 50 a few times, but didn't get a lot of the ball.
But again, it's a bit hard to know with those roles, isn't it? We think of performance through the lens of how much footy they get, but the coaches don't. So he played his role, no doubt, and he used the ball cleverly a few times.
Chandler is most definitely putting his hand up for selection as a small crumbing forward, 13 possessions, 1 goal, 1 with 2 goals assist. Given that Pickett will play more midfield minutes, there may be an opening for another small forward. I'll go back to Bay Riffin's question earlier. Do you think Chandler will play round 1? And is there room for all these small forwards, Cozzy Pickett included, in the team?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's interesting. I wasn't massively blown away by his game, but by the same token, again, it's a bit like I was saying, it's a hard role, isn't it? It's a hard role to be in the game. I think your point is a really a good one, is that because he's going to be playing more time in the midfield, well, you still need a small forward.
But how much time is Cozzy going to play in the midfield? There's suggestions that it's probably 20%, and like Track might play 20% in the forward line as a forward, or 15% a bit on the bench.
I think he will be selected round 1. So the question more will be, is that is he in our best team when you've got Ceylon? Richard's got to come back into that team.
He'll have to keep his spot based on his performances. So. He's the master of his domain at the moment.
One of the great things about the fantastic reporting from training, it's just been awesome, is, people have been, saying how, including yourself, I think, how well he's been training, and, they've signed him on. There is a point, I forget, one of the posters asked a question around, I mean, the chief, I think, there is in the mix of things is, what does it say to him if he doesn't get, he signed on, he probably had other offers. He's the sort of player that, good teams lose. You want him playing senior footy.
Well,
he
like Bedford went for opportunities elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
And no one would blame him.
Yeah.
He was desperately unlucky last year to cop that suspension, I thought. And he was playing good footy at that time, didn't really get another crack at it. The thing, I really like the fact he's another good kick, but he takes his chances. He's fit. He could push up, as a high half forward. He's definitely on the cusp, but I suspect he'll be in the round 1 too.
All right, let's go. We'll just rapid fire. You can go on the players that played in the twos, perhaps the ones vying for a senior spot. We've got a few rookies that have played guys like Jefferson, Adams, Verrill, Kai Farris-White. They're development players. They're going to play the year out at Casey. We've got the luxury to be able to play them there. So unless you have anything specific on those guys,
just on Will Ferrell, someone posted on Demonland.
Verrill, not Will Ferrell.
Well, did I say Will?
Will Ferrell.
I was going to make an Anchorman joke, but I couldn't work. Is that he's a good-looking rooster, but he looks like who was the Melbourne player, the ruckman who was mates with Watsy?
Spencer, Spencer.
Big head, tall. He looks like a better version of the player. I can't remember whose name it was also a ruckman. He actually moved pretty well for a big fella, I thought, and took a nice mark up forward. He looked all right, I thought. No one else really stood out from those young players. Deacon Smith moved well, I thought. Monez Wakefield did a few nice things. He was probably the standout of the younger players in that team. Jordan, as I said, looked good, and Hibbo looked good. The player in that I was most disappointed.
So we've got Shaki, Tomlinson, Daniel Turner are the other three. So I'm sure you're going to mention Tomlinson. Disappointed.
Yeah, Tomlinson. I mean, he got a bath from. I couldn't work out. He was on. young player in that team. I can't remember. There was a player called Archimedes, which it's not his name, but I like the if he was a D's player, that's what I'd be calling him because he loves the angles. But he got touched up by a couple of young players in marking contests, and he's not great one-on-one marking.
Well, that's what he's
there
for.
A great sign. But the thing that worried me, to be honest, was that in that last period, I moved around the other side of the ground. My friends bailed, and I went around the other side of the ground. I was on the fence, and he was kicking up the flank towards the city, and he kicked, and it went out, not on the full, but went out, and it was to Shaki, who was leading, and he gave Shaki a mouthful. You remember last year in the Casey North game, someone else did that, yelled at Rivers, and you and I both thought, that's not so great. He did exactly that, and he yelled at Shaki, and I think he said something like, that's where you were leading, or da-da-da. But just the tone of it was like, Shaki's new into the team, doesn't know all of the systems. I just thought it was, to be honest, it was not on. And it just spoke to me a little bit about a fella who's at the crossroads, because anyone playing in that period, one, they'd know they're not in the best 22 probably, but by that stage there were not even any umpires, so it felt like a Mickey Mouse game, and he's running around, and he's just been pantsed by a bloody rookie basically, who kicked a couple of goals on him and took marks, and so that was a little bit of a warning, sort of a concern for me. Warning light.
I sort of feel for him a little bit. He's one of those guys that trains his guts out. He's really a top trainer. I haven't seen him give anyone sprays at training. But
I feel for it. It'd be so frustrating, wouldn't it?
He's not in the top 3 defenders who have got the May, Petty, Lever. He's not. Daniel Turner's probably ahead of him. Well, and I might even say, I didn't see how Kai Turner played, but the way Kai Turner's been training, it looks like he might even be ahead of him, and he's a rookie. So,
well, I'm not sure about Kai Turner, but I said to my mate exactly what you just said. Well, geez, Turner, Disco's ahead of Tomlinson, and he was probably. I mentioned AMW. Actually, Turner was probably our best player in those last sort of Mickey Mouse 3 periods, and he took a total screamer right in front of me.
He's got no fear. From what I've seen at training, he's just goes at it. He's conscientious.
And he's a stick. So, he's in that team before Tomo is, for instance. And I said on D-Milan that Tomo, I was hoping maybe he'd thin down a bit and be a high half forward, and maybe, but he doesn't look to have a thin down. Shaki, I thought was, he kicked a beautiful goal, kicked a natural snap, but he also kicked a, really nice looking kick. I see him as, they played him in the VFL last year as a true full forward, but I see him as more as a high half forward potentially if he's going to get into that team, because he's not going to take, unless maybe he comes in for Fritsch, for instance, at some point, but he's not going to take one of McDonald or Brown's position, is he, as a tall? So that leaves him, I think as a potentially really damaging high half forward. So I've got a bit of hope he'll work his way into it. I've forgotten that he was a pick 2. I mean, he's a
pick 2, and from all reports, he's trained, and this is from players. They've all been super impressed with him. He's training. It's whether he can show it on Casey. That's obviously where he's going to have to start and prove himself. And if he can, he'll get his opportunity. Might have to wait if there's an injury or something or poor form. But I'm happy to have a look at him.
Sorry. We didn't pay much for Hunter. We didn't pay anything for Shaki, in terms of pay. You know what I mean? We didn't need to give anything up for Shaki. So it's all any benefit he brings to the team is all cream on top.
We've said it's like for Wiedemann, and just even what I've seen at training, I think he's ahead of Wiedemann. But we'll see how he goes.
DL Fart reminds me in the chat room. It's exactly right. DL Fart, spot on. Jack Fitzpatrick.
Jack
looks like an improved, much better version of Fitzpatrick. Stu also notes that Kai looks like a smooth mover and be a good defender, and he didn't do anything special, but that's what does stand out is that he looks a good mover. But so does and Deacon Smith for the same reason.
I'm just going through. We had a few other questions. This is probably one that talks about the. It's two guys we haven't talked about in the reserves, and I didn't see it. So this is a question for you. This is from Supreme Demon. My other question is more related to player development. How do we see the progress of Bailey Laurie and Blake Howes so far? Who is closer to a senior debut in 2023?
It's a good question. House didn't play, did he?
Didn't he?
I don't think so. I can't
22,
recall.
I think he is.
No, he did. He did.
He's skinny.
I would have had. I mean, Laurie's an interesting one. Where does he get in? Like halfback flank. Suddenly we've got a surfeit of players in that position.
Half forward,
I think he wasn't. Also. He wasn't a standout. I think Laurie's going to struggle, to be honest. Is my gut feeling. Howes, I really like the way he moves, and there's been a bit of a rap on him from the club. He seems really talented. So if I was to have a bet on who will make their senior debut first, I'd land on Howes.
Stu had a question. He actually posted something that we'll talk about in the season preview in a couple of weeks. But in lieu of that, he's asked another question. Based on Friday's game, which player who has played 0 senior games for the D's are you most excited about? So anyone besides McVee, who we saw the other day?
Well, JVR.
Yep.
JVR. There's a question in the chat room about Wowie.
Wowie.
Wowie actually, he moves super well. He speaking, and he looks really good condition. He looks like he played a bit of time on the wing, and he looks like a natural winger. It looks like a good position for him. So, JVR is obviously the one that everyone's hanging out to see make his debut. Monty's Wakefield, if and when he makes his debut, he'll obviously be AFL ready by that stage. He's got some tricks, I think. So he could be someone exciting to watch, moving forward. But I really like, Big Will, big old, good-looking Jack Fitzpatrick.
Diamond Jim has asked, do you think it's too early to discuss loading?
Well, they're finishing their loading right now, and after the game.
Yes, so I was going to ask you about this. After the game,
in the heat, 30 degrees, they were exhausted. Didn't leave anything on the field. My friend went out for a fag out the back. Who do they see? The whole team is doing sprints out on the oval out the other side.
You can see it in the post-match thread. Mitch Cleary took video of it. For half an hour, they were doing sprints on the oval across the road. Flat-out sprints, up and back. I don't know how long the sprints were. But, they did that for half an hour in 33-degree heat, and straight after the game, because I left, as soon as the siren went, I made for the exit, and as I was walking out, the whole team was walking out to go across the road. I just thought maybe they were going to stretch, but obviously they did another half an hour.
And flat out.
Yeah.
And so even though I know that was a joke from Diamond Jim, but this is a really critical period. And you posted a thing ages ago, a couple of weeks ago, that was a review of how the clubs were doing it in their pre-seasons. January, this period now, and sort of January, February is their peak time. Now they're going to taper off for it. But if you don't get your kilometres in your legs now, you can't get them. There's no catch-up anymore. And so clubs like the Saints, who have got multiple players out who have missed this critical time to get kilometres in their legs and that loading done, are really going to struggle, which is why that article, I made a note to myself to dig it back up, because it's going to be my sort of template for punting for the first part of the season, and also who's not going to make the 8, because any team who have not got the bulk of their players able to complete all of the training sessions in January and February are going to be in trouble. Particularly the way the game's trending now is what I've been banging on about. It's just so incredibly aerobically challenging, and we take it to the next level in terms of it being such a key part of our game plan. Other teams have closed that gap a bit. Collingwood closed it a bit last year, but we came back to them. If we get to the levels, that the club obviously want us to get to, we'll be rolling over plenty of teams. So, I by all accounts, only Salem has been our key 22 player who's really missed any sessions, and that's only been in the last couple of weeks, hasn't it?
Yep.
When that thyroid issue came up. Otherwise, we've had a few in rehab. Smith has missed sessions, but, as 85, 90% of our list has completed all of their sessions in January and February, and it's just so critical for what the whole year looks like. And there's some clubs that are, like Carlton is another one, Swans and Saints have all had key players miss big blocks of time during January, February. Walsh, for instance, at the Blues, and the Saints, as I mentioned. So all of those teams will struggle with their fitness.
D Zephyr has said, agreed with you. I also thought A&B had a solid game. He mostly gets talked about when people think he's had a bad game. Also said, in at least one centre bounce, we saw Grundy, Rivers, Pickett at A&B from memory. Do you think we will mix it up like that on the rare occasion during the season proper? To which I replied, would be at DEFCON 1 on the MFC SS scale if that occurred. I don't think we're going to go in with a full second tier, that's almost third tier with some of the midfielders that he selected there. So nothing against any of those guys, but I doubt we'll see that in a game, and if so, we're in a lot of trouble. And finally, Whispering Jack has on the podcast thread has said, I think we should protest the AFL for abandoning the 8th period of Friday's match sim when we would have had the wind advantage in that last period. It cost us valuable percentage. So thanks for that, Whispering Jack.
It did. Remember, it was a simulation though, so we could have played. Maybe we did play the 8th period, and no one saw it. It was like a virtual simulation. To be honest, I'm really pleased no one got injured in that 7th period, because watching it was Mickey Mouse having,
So what? There was no umpires. So who was there were no free kicks?
Like people from the clubs.
Oh, okay. So no official umpires, but they had umpires.
Yeah, exactly. But the whole thing, as soon as you lose your umpires, everyone goes, well, this is not a serious game. Yeah, it's in those sorts of circumstances that accidents happen. And
they should have really just played two separate games and had two separate umpires or whatever.
Yeah. But then there would have been two practice matches instead of one long super simulation.
Really silly, because what did they expect Razor Ray to run around for 8 periods on a 35-degree day?
Well, he didn't. He only did 4, and then he was upstairs. I saw him in the commentary box or whatever.
Well, the next game is versus Richmond. The Demons take on the Tigers out at Casey Fields on Saturday at 4:10. Based on previous years, B-Man, we know that you don't believe that we will go into the match with as strong as a lineup than we did in the first practice match. What can we expect?
Yeah, I reckon that some of those players like Hibberd will play, I suspect, maybe... Van Rooyen will play, so they'll bring in maybe even Tomlinson. Some of those players, who are in the frame, but potentially, I just, there was talk about Fritsch. They'll want to get Fritsch sometime. Melksham, I'm not sure what's the deal with Melksham.
He's been in rehab, something with his leg. As I've been, I think 3 Wednesdays in a row, so he's sort of been increasing what he's been doing. But I don't know if he's ready match. Will Smith be match ready? Or well, Smith was participating in a lot in the last session I went to. He was back, sort of participating in all of the drills, and the session I saw there wasn't a lot of contact. So I think the last thing they did had a bit of contact, and he wasn't involved in that one. So
if he's anywhere close, they might play him. I'm really interested to hear again from the track watchers that he's been training with the forward group.
I believe he was.
See him play.
Did I say? I said he was with the forwards, and Gus was.
Yeah, I like it, particularly if you're going to kick to a pack. I've always liked the idea of him being, I just think he's not a natural defender. He's okay in that position. I rate him pretty highly, but
I like him too. But I just think he's so injury prone. I don't.
Yeah. Though this injury has not been his, fault. I don't think so. It's not. Well, he's injury prone. So my thought about the game is that they'll probably try a lot more fluid, changes. They'll try some positional things. Maybe they'll practice some set plays and some things. So maybe we'll get a look at some of their other sort of tactical changes they might be sort of considering. Stu makes a point around handballs in the thread that last year that we handballed a lot, and I noted last year that we were using handball a lot to move it forward and long handballs. We didn't do so many of them this week, and Stu makes a point that other teams were sweating on our handballs out. So maybe that's the adjustment they've made with the kicking that I mentioned before is, the advantage of a kick is that you have two choices. Once you kick the ball, the player marking it has two choices, don't they? They can stop and take their full 30 seconds and assess their option, or they can keep going and keep the ball in motion. You only have one option if you receive a handball. You've got to keep the ball in motion. So again, the percentage play is probably more kick. So maybe that is a sort of change that we're looking at. It won't be the same sort of intensity as this game.
Well, I think we're going to leave that there. We will be back next week. We'll wrap up the practice match against the Tigers, and then the week after we'll do an in-depth season 2023 preview where we'll each cover one of the lines, the forwards, mids, backs, as well as give our predictions for the year ahead. So stay tuned for that one. Thank you for everyone who wrote in a question or comment. Thanks for, I think it was Michael from Paran who called in earlier. Thank you to my co-host Beerman, and thank you, the audience, for listening. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
Come on, demons.